She's not the scheme director, that's Professor Alison Ross, but unfortunately she can't be with us today. And so Annika is very kindly volunteered to stand in for her. And I'd also like to welcome Cherie Atkinson. Cherie, do you want to turn on your camera and have a wave? Thank you. Cherie is our Director for Discovery Grant Opportunities. And thank you both for being here today. Before I go on, just some very quick housekeeping. We have about an hour for today's webinar. Somebody has no sound. Is that correct for everybody or just one person in the chat? Can most other people hear me? Yes? Okay, so I think it might be a particular problem for that person. Before I go on, just some quick housekeeping. We've about an hour today, as I mentioned. Can you please remain on mute? There'll be some time for questions at the end, but I'll also pause for questions at the end of each section. So there's plenty of opportunities built in here for you to ask questions of our team. If you have a question that is really burning and you're worried you might forget it, please put it in the chat function and we'll monitor them as we progress. And it also means that if there are any questions that we don't get to during today's session, we can answer them in an FAQ afterwards. We will be recording today's session, so people ought to be comfortable with the recording, and we'll share that afterwards, as well as a Q&A in written form. Okay, so now we'll go on to the first slide. As I said, the purpose of today's webinar is to share information with you about the way we've streamlined and improved the Australian Laureate Fellowship Grant Guidelines and application documents specifically, and also the Discovery Fellowships more broadly. And I know we've had a few questions coming through about DECRAs and futures, and we've allowed a bit of time to talk about that as well. I'll be discussing the changes that we have made and our thinking that informed those changes. As you know, I think because many of you were present, the ARC has been undertaking extensive consultation about the Discovery Program grant processes. And during that review, we heard from lots of people, including yourself, but also grant recipients, the research leadership in the university, applicants and different stakeholder groups like the EMCR network, for example. And as part of that process, we decided to separate out the Discovery Program Fellowship Guidelines from Discovery Projects and Discovery Indigenous, and we've undertaken substantial streamlining. I'm here today to talk about where we landed with the Discovery Fellowship Guidelines, the instructions to applicants, and the application form, and finally the changes we've made to ROPE, which I'd like to mention here, and I'll mention it later, that the ROPE changes will be ones that we'll be rolling out across the rest of our fellowships and schemes as well. In making changes to the fellowships, the ARC has sought to bring the objectives, assessment criteria and application form into alignment. And those changes have been made with the intention of streamlining that process for applicants, for assessors, for you as research officers and for us as the ARC. So we're trying to appeal to a broad audience through this process of alignment. So first, I'll just quickly emphasise the key dates for Laureate Fellowships this year. I'm sure you know them, but just to remind you, the scheme opened about a fortnight ago on the 16th of August, and there's a couple of other important dates you need to keep in mind. The request not to assess closes in about a month, less than a month, on the 25th of September, and the applications themselves will close on the 10th of October, and the rejoinders will be open in January between the 8th and the 19th, and then we'll make an announcement in about mid-June, between the 5th and 18th of June 2024. Now, we have made some changes to the grant guidelines following the very helpful and generous feedback we received from people like yourselves during our consultation session, and we've streamlined and updated them in several ways. Before I speak more about that, I do think it's important to emphasise that there is a substantial amount of continuity with previous versions of the guidelines. We certainly haven't changed everything, but we've instead sought to improve and streamline what we already had. As I flagged already, we have separated out the Discovery Fellowships from Discovery Indigenous and from Discovery Projects. And we did that for two main reasons. The first was that we felt that providing the most specific information possible for applicants would be helpful. If you're applying for a fellowship example, you don't need to know all about Discovery Projects. So we've streamlined them and put all the fellowships in one guidelines. The second reason for that was to allow the ARC to publish the grant guidelines in time for opening the laureate scheme, while also giving us time to consider further changes to the Discovery Project scheme, including a two-stage application process. And as you know, we'll be having another meeting about that one on Friday. So it's a big week here for us in webinar land at the ARC. So if you have any questions about the two-step, please hold them over to our meeting on Friday. We're not currently able to confirm whether we're going ahead with that, but I will, as I said, I'll talk more about that on Friday. As with our other guidelines, the new Discovery Fellowship guidelines will run for more than 1 year. And we know that that continuity is especially important to you for planning purposes. And we don't substantially update guidelines yearly. We've also streamlined the guidelines to remove redundant detail, such as unused definition, duplicated information, and to streamline clauses that we judge to be unnecessarily complex. And that's been undertaken to increase usability, but also to provide consistency across schemes. We saw that our streamlined guidelines for linkage and for the industry fellowships were very well received. And so we took that endorsement and we've applied similar principles here to the Discovery Fellowship guidelines. We also made a small number of policy changes and implemented those in the grant guidelines, and some of them relate more closely to laureate fellowships than others. We've updated the NIT information in line with the new process used in other schemes. So we now request applicants to provide a brief response that articulates the benefits of the proposed research in plain English in general terms beyond the period of the grant. And that change is being implemented across our grant guidelines as they are updated. And as you know, the DVCR signs off on that NIT and we won't be requesting any revisions to it. So that process is now finished. We've also updated the project limits for DECRAs, bringing the requirements into line with what we ask of laureates and future fellows. So previously, as I'm sure you know, DECRA candidates were required to meet the project limit requirements at the grant opportunity closing date. But now, like laureates and like future fellows, they may wait to relinquish grants to meet project limits in the post-award period. So we felt like that was an equity measure for early career researchers. We also included a new section on fellows' responsibility so we could ensure clarity around residency and time commitment requirements for applicants in those guidelines. And that information aligns with previous clauses in the guidelines and grant agreement, but brings them together in a single section so that those responsibilities are clear from the outset. This is not This is not a scheme where people can just go and disappear overseas for 4 or 5 years, for example. There are residence requirements. The last notable changes we made were to update the individual fellowship objectives and assessment criteria. Now, before I move to speak to more detail about those objectives and criteria, I'd be pleased to answer any questions you might have about that preliminary section that I've just delivered. Does anybody have any questions about any of that? No? Okay, if that's the case, you can, if something comes up later for you, you can put it in the chat, or you can ask it at the end of another section.
Yeah.
Is somebody saying something?
So Ad A, I don't have Ad A for an hour.
Oh, I think she just accidentally turned on her microphone and now she's turned it off again. Okay, we might go on to the next slide. Yes. updated laureate objectives and assessment criteria. As you'll see on the slide, we've updated the objectives for the laureate fellowships, and we've done that because we're seeking to emphasise that we're trying to attract and retain outstanding researchers of international standing with exceptional strengths in leadership, collaboration, mentorship, and the capability to build a legacy. We want to emphasise the building of scale and focus alongside connections and the development of new links between researchers, the international research community, industry and end users. We expect laureates to undertake innovative and groundbreaking research that addresses a problem or gap, and they need to demonstrate effective research planning and implementation that represents value for money. And there's a big emphasis in the laureate scheme, as you would know, on the ability to create an excellent research training environment to nurture that next generation of researchers. So the laureates are all about capacity building in that next generation and creating this enduring legacy in terms of the research capability in the Australian environment. And of course, like all our schemes, we need research that benefits the Australian community in lots of ways, or many different ways: economic, commercial, environmental, social, or cultural, and especially in priority areas for the Australian government. Next slide, please. So in the laureate fellowships, we also adjusted the language of project quality and innovation criteria to streamline and also underline specific areas of quality. The only changes that have been made are in the second and third points, so that laureate applicants are now assessed on the innovation of the research program in the context of recent international advances in research in their chosen area, and also the clarity of their major research questions. And that's to really sort of train their mind and to make the application clearer for them and for assessors. But the rest of the Australian Laureate Fellowship assessment criteria remains unchanged. Now, did anybody have any questions about any of those changes that we made? No? Okay, I'll keep going. Now I'll get on to the section where I'm talking about changes to the ITAs and the application form. Some of those changes will impact applicants and others will impact assessors. What we're trying to do here is reduce the workload for applicant and assessors while also still ensuring that we have the highest quality laureate applicants. Some changes we've made that will improve the application experience include the provision of 10 questions to assist applicants in addressing those very explicit assessment criteria. We've reduced page limits, so now the application is 7 pages in the project description in total, down from 10. And the section of justification of funding requested from the ARC has been reduced from 5 to 3 pages. We've also streamlined the budget input section, noting that budgets still need to be justified. So the personnel still need to be detailed. The other budget sections can be high level in terms of numbers, and then the justification occurs in the budget justification section. We've added an extra validation to ensure that every application includes those 2 PDRAs and the 2 postgraduate researchers. So that needs to be validated before the application can be submitted. And finally, we've removed questions that are no longer required or covered in the general agreement and can be managed in that post-award space. So they include questions about the time commitment, administrative duties, current Australian government fellowships, applicant FOR codes and expertise text. So all of that has gone from the application. We've also made some changes to streamline and improve the process from the point of view of assessors. So those changes include reordering the different parts of the application form so that the assessors see the most crucial information first. So the first thing they see now is not all the sort of statistical information. They see the information about the applicant, and then they see the information about the project. The NIT is now visible to assessors because it's part of the peer review of the application. And the country of residence and project relinquishment questions are no longer visible to assessors, as that information isn't essential for assessors to see. So we're trying to make the application form more user-friendly for assessors as well as applicants. And we made those changes really in direct response to feedback from the sector about the application and assessment processes in the fellowships. And we very much hope that those streamlining changes will reduce administrative burden for researchers and for research office staff and assessors. And again, I'll pause there in case anybody has any questions about any of those changes. No, you're a very quiet group. I'll keep going. I'm an experienced tutor, so I know how to wait for time for people to ask questions if they want to. So I'll just wait another minute in case there's anything. Okay, sounds good. Thank you for that ringing endorsement, who is unknown user. Okay, on to the next slide. Finally, the last update I wanted to provide you with is about changes to research, opportunity and performance evidence, or ROPE as we all call it. As you know, the purpose of ROPE is to enable evaluation of a researcher's activities, their outputs and their achievements in the context of career and life opportunities and experiences, including, where relevant, significant career interruptions. It supports eligible researchers to have fair and equitable access to ARC research funding. The ROPE policy and assessment criteria have contributed to positive policy outcomes across ARC schemes, including in our schemes equivalent or higher success rates for women compared to men, and including for researchers who've experienced that one or several career interruptions. When we were doing our consultations about these changes, we heard that there was some concern within the sector about the amount of information that applicants are asked to provide, some of which might be sensitive, and the amount of time it was taking to put that information into the application form. Now, we've been working hard to identify opportunities for us to respond to those concerns. And the key changes we made are that the assessors will no longer be able to see the details of an applicant's career interruption. Instead, they'll be shown a total amount of time for assessing ROPE. So even though applicants will enter that information on the form because it needs to be validated by the DBCR that this is in fact the case, that this career interruption did occur, it will remove the need for assessors to see that information about applicants. And in doing so, it will increase the privacy for applicants and prevent assessors being shown unnecessary detail about their private life. Of course, if an applicant wanted in their page statement to say something a little further that they felt was relevant, they could do that, but there's no obligation for an applicant to disclose the nature of their career interruptions. They are now being assessed on Professor X got their PhD in 2012. In that time, they've had 5 years research opportunity, will be the statement that assessors will see. Of course, it'll be longer for laureates, but you know what I mean. That's the general principle. We've also transitioned to requesting only the top 10 career best outputs rather than up to 100, which is as it is now. And that change was based on strong sector recommendations about the need to focus assessment on quality rather than quantity. And we've removed the researcher capability statement from the required fields within the project description. So now assessors, if they're really training their mind on the track record of this individual applicant, the laureate, they will be looking at Part B, where the laureate applicant has filled in their career highlights section, their 10 best publications, their career statement, the context statement about their publications. That information all now sits in that one part of the application. So in making those changes to ROPE, we're hoping to reduce the workload of applicants and assessors and to require less sensitive information of applicants. and to ensure assessors are only asked to judge what is strictly relevant to the applicant and to their project. Now, I'd also like to briefly notify you of the way we've updated future fellowships and DECRA guidelines in the same spirit. So we've had a couple of questions coming through from research officers saying, okay, are these changes to laureate presaging other changes that will happen in DECRA and future fellowship? And the answer is basically yes. So the rope will look pretty much the same for DECRA and for future fellowship applicants. And we've also updated the objectives, which you will have seen, in the assessment criteria for each scheme. And we've also will be updating the application form for those schemes so that, again, the key information will be seen by assessors first, the Part B about the individual applicant, and then Part C about the project. The rope will be the same. The instructions to applicants will include questions such as you can see on your screen now, which are very like the laureate in their intention to drive applicants to write a project description that really aligns with those assessment criteria, so that when an assessor is looking for the information in relation to project quality, in relation to benefit, etc., they can see it. And yes, the page limit will also be reduced for those two schemes as well.